Hey, everybody, this is Heidi St. John. Thanks for joining me. You guys have found me at my little corner of the internet. I'm so glad that you're here today. It's Meet My Friend Friday. I've got a new friend on the show with me today. A homeschool dad is joining me. Brian Tonnell is here, and we are going to talk about homeschooling from the perspective of a dad. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So I hope you guys are enjoying the end to the week. We have been hotter than heck here in the Vancouver area. I'm telling you what, like up into the hundreds. We don't even know what to do when it gets hot like that around here. So a lot of people just staying indoors. And I am out on a street corner today with a bunch of people from my campaign waving flags and trying to get out the vote and handing popsicles to people. So we're having a hoot and holler and good time here as we come up to primary day, which you guys all know is next Tuesday. I wanted to say thank you again to everybody who's been praying for me as I've been running for Congress. We don't know what the outcome will be, but we know that God has a plan no matter what. So we appreciate you guys and your continued prayers for that. I'm excited to jump into the show and welcome a new friend on. His name is Brian Tonnell, and I was introduced to him by my friend Melissa. And she's like, man, Heidi, you got to talk to this guy. He homeschooled his kids. They graduated. And I am just so thrilled to have him come on. He's been gracious to agree to speak to me today. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for having me. The last time I spoke to you, you were actually sitting in this very chair, if you recall.
That's right, because, yes, I do, because Charlie Kirk also sat there.
That's right, and Dinesh D'Souza, and I call this the throne of prognostication. And so I'm coming to you from the throne of prognostication.
We need more of that. We need all of the prognostication that we can get.
I totally agree.
You're coming to me from Oklahoma, and it's hot there because Melissa has been telling me how hot it is. I don't know how you guys are doing it.
That's right. I think a couple days from now, our high is going to be 90, which is 20 degrees warm, cooler than it is today. So that's crazy. Yeah, we've been in the 110s for quite some time. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is just crazy. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian.
Okay. Well, I'm an old guy. Born in 65, so I'm 57-ish. I can't do the math, really.
Not that much older than me, so watch it
Okay,
there when you're calling yourself an old guy.
Watching it. My dad was in the Air Force, and so we moved all around the world, but he retired in Montgomery, Alabama. But the locals call that Montgomery. That's how they call it.
Montgomery.
That's right. Went to college at Auburn University in Alabama. Met my wife, who actually went to University of Georgia. Met my wife there. We got married. That was 32 years ago. Eventually had two boys.
So did you guys get married in 89?
90.
90. Okay, so I got married in 89. So I would say you got to be right around there.
Yes. So actually 2 days from now will be 32 years. And so.
Wow, congratulations.
Yes, ma'am. So we had two boys. One of them is graduated. He's off in the Air Force right now. And the other one will be entering his junior year at Liberty University in Virginia.
Wow. Goes by fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So I graduated and went into the Air Force as a pilot candidate. Graduated from flight school and then became an F-15 pilot. Moved all over the world with my wife and retired in 2009. And then immediately began homeschooling my kids. And so that's sort of brings you up to speed.
So so homeschooling is a big decision. There are a lot of people listening to this who never considered homeschooling, and they're doing it now because of COVID, because of the wickedness really that's in our school system. And you guys have a story. Why did you decide to start homeschooling?
Actually, I didn't. It was my wife. It was Jenny. It's about 20 years ago or so. She came to me and she said she felt like God was prompting her to homeschool. And I thought, initially I thought, well, she's kind of nuts, and our families, my family, her family, they're all sort of like, okay, what's wrong with you people?
Right.
But I had learned a couple things in my life up to this point. Number one is a good husband listens to his wife, right? And number two is I thought, you can't really screw up first grade that bad. And so, we did. And every year before the school year began, wherever we lived, Miss Jenny would have the kids signed up at the local school,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
and every year she would come to me and say, "Okay, I'm kind of annoyed at this, but God is prompting me again to homeschool," and this went on for several years. And so she homeschooled the boys.
Yeah.
In 2009, I had been in the Air Force now for 22 years, and I was trying to decide what am I going to do with my life? Should I retire? Should I stay in? And so there was a lot of turmoil with, what's the rest of my life going to look like?
Right. It's a big change.
Yeah, and so I was praying about it, and all of a sudden, God sort of punched me in the chest, and it was very clear. He said, "You're going to homeschool," and I thought, right, okay, but being a military man for 22 years, I saluted smartly and said, "Okay, that's you're the boss. That's what I'm doing." Um, so over the course of the next couple weeks, before I had actually turned in my retirement papers, I got 2 phone calls from 2 of my Air Force buddies. One of them offered me a job in Virginia, flying the F-22, which was like
Wow.
the Ferrari of the fighter pilot world.
Oh, yeah. That's crazy.
And the other one, who had recently retired, offered me a civilian flying job, training airline pilots how to deal with spatial disorientation. Basically, my job would be to fly aerobatic aircraft with an airline pilot in the other seat, and my job would be to kind of spin his gyros, get him sick. And I thought, what an awesome way to make a living, So I was torn. My options were stay in the Air Force and fly the F-22, retire and fly aerobatic aircraft, or retire and homeschool. I thought, really, that's my option.
Well, homeschooling would kind of be a mixture of both of those things.
Yeah. Trying to make kids sick. I like that. That's it.
Yeah, trying to it's like something's messing with your equilibrium,
No, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
So about that time in our Sunday school class, we were studying the book of Nehemiah, and we got to chapter 6. And I read a verse in chapter 6, and it rocked my world. And my answer was clear at that point. In chapter 6 of Nehemiah, he's rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. He's doing God's work, and his detractors are trying to get him to come down from the wall to meet with them. And his response is what sort of blew my socks off. He said, "I'm doing a great work, and I can't come down." And that was my answer. God had clearly told me to homeschool, and that's the great work that he gave to me. And I can't come down, no matter how tempting it is. So I retired in July of 2009, and the very next month I was tutoring my 8th grade son and his classmates in a homeschool program called Classical Conversations. And since then, I taught my eldest and his classmates, took them 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And then I swung back, picked up my youngest, who was in 8th grade at that time, and took him and his classmates through graduation in 2019. And so for the last 3 school years, I've continued with the program. I'm still homeschooling other people's kids. And so what prompted me to homeschool, it was really for both Jenny and I, it was God poking us in the chest and saying, "This is what you're going to do." And so that's what prompted us really to homeschool.
Well, it's not very often that I talk to a dad who really took an active role in the education of their kids, but you've gone beyond that because now your kids are graduated and you're still in the homeschool movement.
Yeah.
You're still helping, you're still staying in there. Why are you doing that?
Well, my reasons changed over time. So initially, the reason that I homeschool is because God told me to, but over the years, that has changed. It's actually become quite a bit more in depth. And and I can take you on this journey if we have time. When I was in the Air Force, I watched this happen. I watched the Air Force transition from a fighting force to sort of a playground for social experimentation.
Boy, that's the entire military right now.
Absolutely.
Every branch.
Yeah. And so I watched it move to a kindler, gentler Air Force where feelings are held in higher regard than accomplishment of the mission. And this mentality was coming from the top down. The chief of staff of the Air Force works for the Secretary of the Air Force, who works for the Secretary of Defense, who is appointed by the president. And so really it was politicians who were promoting this social agenda.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Yeah.
But it was very convenient to start with the military, really for a couple reasons. One is they have direct control over the military. And number two is nobody in the military has any recourse. You can't say, hey, foul. I don't think so. I'm going to wave this flag here because what you're doing is wrong. You just salute smartly and move on. You don't have an option, really. And so in the early 2000s, as I was getting closer to retirement, the question of gays in the military, that was a hot topic of discussion. Clinton had done his thing.
And what year was this?
This was in the early 2000s when.
Okay.
And I think it was about 10 years later that the ban was totally lifted. But so we had a lot of discussions in the Air Force and about this topic. And one of the things that I saw was a trend was that most of my peers, when we had this discussion, they basically said, as long as they do their thing over there, as long as they don't bother me, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. And that bothered me because I thought, do we no longer care about right and wrong? Do we only care about those things that affect us directly? And a couple years later, was reading a book by Francis Schaeffer called "How Should We Then Live?" And it's a great book. And he said that Americans used to have a myriad of values that we held in high regard, but today we only have two. We only have two values that we cling to, and one of them is personal peace, and the other is affluence. And so if it does not affect my pocketbook, I don't care about it. I'm apathetic toward it. And the other one is if it doesn't affect me in my personal space, in my home, then I don't care about it. I'm very apathetic. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of watched this play itself out in the military. And then even after the military, I watched this play itself out in the Boy Scouts because we had been part of that for years.
That's certainly,
and
sad.
As a matter of fact, the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates was his name. He was the Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration. He's the one that lifted the ban on gays in the military. And then he retired, and almost immediately he was scooped up by the Boy Scouts. And he became the president of the Boy Scouts of America. And he did the same thing in the Boy Scouts that he did in the military. And the results have been obviously disastrous. The people in the Boy Scouts, unlike the people in the military, have recourse. And they've been leaving in droves. And, the Boy Scouts are filing bankruptcy right now. And it's just bad things are happening.
I've had the president of Trail Life on here talking about alternatives to the Boy Scouts. Brian, I'm going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right. So, Brian, before the break, we were talking about what's been happening in the military and what's been happening with regard to the culture. We've got a culture in decline. Mm-hmm. There's no question.
Yeah.
It's the moral decay is showing. A lot of people are listening to this today. In the last probably 6 minutes that I have, I want to touch on this stuff because there are parents who are considering pulling their kids out of school right now. They're looking around and they feel overwhelmed by the whole thing.
Absolutely.
right? They're looking around. They see the attack on American values. They just feel like, you know what? Why should I even keep fighting? What keeps you going? Because there are dads who are listening to you who are wondering, I wonder if I shouldn't get off the bench and onto the battlefield. And one of the first things you can do, I think, is take your kids out of the school system.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As I was saying before the break, my reasons for homeschooling have changed. And so as I went down this journey and I saw what was happening around me, I decided, I'm trying to teach my kids how to learn. I'm trying to teach them to be able to teach themselves. And so I thought, I'm going to investigate. I'm going to find out what's happening in our culture. I should be able to do this. I should be able to model this, for my kids. And so I studied a lot and I observed and I dug deep and I realized that Marxist ideas have deeply permeated the culture. I mean, beginning in the education system with the father of modern education, John Dewey, heavily influenced by Marx, a writer and signer of the 1933 Humanist Manifesto, where God is denied, and in that document they say no deity will save us. We must save ourselves, and the government should provide subsistence for all humanity. I mean, these are hugely Marxist ideas. I realize that critical race theory is just a subset of critical theory, 1923 from the Frankfurt School, and that the founder of that, Horkheimer, I think is his name, was heavily influenced by Marx. The Black Lives Matter is founded by self-avowed Marxists, and all of these ideas so deeply permeate our culture, and they have been actively and radically promoted by our higher education institutions. And it's just been over the past couple of years that those ideas have now been brought in, backwards into the primary and secondary education systems. And so one of the, Rod Dreher wrote a book called Live Not by Lies. And he said,
yeah, I've had him on my show. Fantastic.
He's awesome. He said the Marxists today, they don't get their way by shedding blood like they used to. They get their way by shedding tears. And so, I was watching this play itself out. And of course, the answer is God. God is the answer to this. And if we can, and in the ideologies we see today that are so prevalent, deny the existence of God. In fact, they require the absence of God. And we've seen this through history in Russia, in Mao's China, Venezuela, Cambodia, Vietnam, Niger. It's all happening. We're watching it. If we knew our history, we could see it as plainly as day. And so I thought to myself, well, what can I do about this? I think as parents in this culture today, we have abdicated responsibility for raising our children, for for educating our children. We've abdicated
for generations.
For a couple of generations, we've abdicated that to the state. But even beyond that, we've abdicated the teaching of biblical principles. We've abdicated learning about the Creator. We've abdicated that to the church, and I think it's not their job. It's not their job. And what I've seen is the church does a pretty good job of teaching its members to love God with their soul, with their heart. But where the church fails, I think, because it's not their job, is teaching people to love God with their minds. Right. To think critically from a biblical perspective about everything we're seeing that's going on around us. And so my motivation became to teach the next generation to love God with their minds. And that's my new passion. And if we could, I heard a podcaster very recently say, we have to outthink the enemy. And I thought, that's so simple, because progressive policies make absolutely no sense to the rationally thinking person. But the problem
that's how they've been able to push it. We don't have rationally thinking people anymore.
That's it. We've been actively taught not to think. And George Orwell said it very well. He says, if you can't think, someone else will do your thinking for you. And
that's right.
So we live in this
Yeah.
postmodern era where the education system is founded on humanism. The culture is overwhelmed by ideologies influenced by Marx.
Yeah.
Truth has become a moving target, and we're told what to think because we're unable or unwilling and to think for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so if we define truth as that which corresponds to reality, then when truth changes, our very perception of reality must also necessarily change. And so now we have people who are sitting in front of Congress who cannot define what a woman is.
What's really crazy about that, Brian, is I have a little bit different slant on it. I think they can define a woman. I just think that they're afraid to. They're afraid of the woke Marxist mob that's going to come after them and make sure that they don't have a job and that they're laughed at and called all kinds of names by the academic elites in this country who are taking us down a path that we will have a very hard time coming back from.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I've only got about a minute left in this in the show today, and I really want to focus the last couple of moments that I have with you to just encouraging dads. There are a lot of dads listening to this or even moms who are like, is it really that important? Does this homeschooling thing matter? Man, it's a lot of work. Boy, I'm sure tired. We used to have more money. We used to have more time. Speaking of the lives of those, especially the dads who are listening to this right now, wondering, is this education thing really that big of a deal?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. What I've seen, I think human nature demonstrates to us that when the bullets start flying, most people will duck and cover, and they want to wait until the firefight, the shooting ends. But you and I both know that it's not going to end. It's not going to end.
Yep.
And only God can win this fight. But I've talked to a lot of people. I've actually talked to people who said, there's nothing I can do. God will win this. But when I look to the Bible, I think, how many times in the Bible has God won the fight without using his people? In fact, he demands it.
That's right. Yes, he does. Absolutely.
And so this fear that we have, and I think the ultimate fear of humanity is not the fear of death, it's the fear of discomfort. We don't want to lose our likes on our Facebook page. We don't want to be ridiculed. We don't want to lose our jobs.
It's 100% true.
And we would much rather watch the football game, and that's shame on us. But we have a rare sort of Shadrach moment in history. It's right here in front of us. And we need to step into that fire. We need to step into that fire. I heard a man named Scott Rigsby speak years ago who did an Ironman marathon, and without any legs. He's a double amputee. And he said this. He asked me this question. He says, what are you doing that requires faith? And that just cut right to me. And I think our primary job as parents is to train ourselves out of a job, is to train our replacements.
That's right. Yeah.
And that includes me and my son's generation. And so my encouragement is to just listen, especially for people like me who are retired. Listen to what God's telling you to do. Just get off the bench and get into the fight. And he may have some very specific plan, or it might simply be this. If you love me, keep my commands. If your mission might simply be to unashamedly speak truth into the darkness. And so for people like that, for people like me, we can spend our retirement years relaxing and recreating, or we can get off the bench and we can use the knowledge and the experience and the skills that we have to fight the good fight.
I love that. One of the very first people to ever share that sentiment with me was Dr. Dobson years and years ago when I did my first interview with him, and he's since become a friend. I just have such respect for the man. But he asked me if retirement was in the Bible. And I was pregnant with our sixth baby at the time. And I was just like, well, if it is, I haven't read about it. I'm actually not interested in retirement right now because it's so far in my future. And he said, I want you to remember this. He said, we're never supposed to stop doing things for the Lord until the Lord calls us home. And he said, I don't think retirement's in the Bible. And that he's actually living that out right now. I mean, this guy's in his 80s and he's still doing his show. He doesn't believe in retirement because God doesn't believe in it.
There you go.
So no matter what age you are, no matter where you are in your season of, being a full-time employee or running your business or whatever it is, God has a part for you to play until he calls you home. And I love, Brian, that you're doing that so beautifully, encouraging the next generation, as Thomas Jefferson called them, the rising generation, to love this country and to be able to think critically so that they can defend the principles of liberty and defend the word of God. I appreciate you coming on, and I hope to have you back again. Keep me posted on how it's going there.
All right. I'd be happy to come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
You're very welcome.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I hope this was an encouragement to you. I love having moms and dads come on the show who can really speak into what's happening in the culture right now and encourage you guys to love your families well, get off the bench and onto the battlefield. There's not a moment to lose, and God has you here for such a time as this. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will see you back here on Monday at the intersection of faith and culture. For more encouragement, find me online at momstronginternational.com and all major podcast platforms and YouTube.